How do you tactfully, respectfully, and professionally call somebody out without necessarily calling them out for a job that wasn't done well or that met your expectations and to your standards? In this video, I'm going to show you how to do that in a way that's going to keep you and their relationship strong and make you a better leader in doing so. Are you ready to bring some relevant development in your life? Let's go get it.
If you want to raise the bar on your growth, whether it's personal or professional, this is the podcast for you. And now, the host, Juan Alvarado.
Hey, I'm your host, Juan Alvarado. Thank you so much for joining me today. A simple thought process in moving forward. So I've learned that when leading other people, it's hard. You have set standards, you have set expectations, and there's always those few people that are like, I'm going to do it my way, or sorry, I didn't know, or that's not my job. And it's frustrating as a leader. So how do we come along side by side somebody, whether in an evaluation or just a follow-up and a talk through, to call them out in what they did wrong, but not necessarily call them out? Because what happens when we call somebody out? Think about this. Have you ever been called out? It's not fun. In a meeting, Juan did this or so-and-so did this, and you are taken back. Like, why are you calling me out in front of everybody? Or maybe it's a one-on-one. And to be called out, we automatically get defensive. Even when we give feedback, like on an evaluation, people get defensive because they're not willing to hone in on something that they messed up on. So in this place of leadership, and to help you understand this, we have expectations and we have experience. And so we have our experience and we have the other person's experience. And usually, a lot of the time, the leader has more experience than the staff. And sometimes not all the time, but this is where the gap is. This is where the difference is. We have our experience on one side and their experience on the other. And so we think, this is not, how come they're not thinking this way? This is common sense. To you, it might be common sense. I heard the other day that it's not necessarily common sense, it's common experience. It's common for me because I've gone through something like that. I've seen it before, and my strengths show me that this situation requires this type of attention, this type of person, this type of structure. But the person that I'm calling out in this sense doesn't necessarily have that same experience. So on one side we have experience, and the other side we have expectation. There's even a gap within the experience side. So if we have two different things, let's just say on this right side, we have your experience and their experience, and there's a gap there. But then on the other side of the mountain, the other side of the valley, let's say, there is expectations. And what happens is we fill this gap with negativity, right? We do this as parents, we do this as bosses, right? The parent side of things. Why isn't he or she home yet? What are they doing? They must be doing something that they're not supposed to. Maybe there's an accident. Are they okay? And then we start to worry about our children, and we should as parents. As a boss, oh, she's late again. She always does this. Oh, he's late again. She's going to have some BS excuse, or what is it this time? My car broke down. So-and-so was sick. My kid wasn't ready. There was an accident. And we always put, and we think negative to fill that gap. John Maxwell teaches that we need to make sure that we give everybody the benefit of the doubt and think the best. Instead of thinking the worst, let's think the best, and let's put a 10 over everyone's head. And when we put a 10 over everybody's head, 1 being the most negative, 10 being the most positive, if we just think the positive in everything, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, you're also naive to let that happen all the time. So we can't, as leaders, we cannot get pushed over, ran over with excuse, because where there's the gap between experience and expectations, there's an excuse, and nobody likes excuses. I told my son the other day, hey, there's no excuse. You shouldn't tell your coach, well, he's bigger than me, or this happened, or that happened. No, yes, sir, I'll fix it. Some stuff might need an explanation, but hear me out here. There's a gap, and so we as leaders fill it with thinking the worst. Staff will fill it with excuses because there's a disconnect between experience and expectations. So we need to then, first layer is put a 10 on top of everybody's head and communicate. But that's the second part, is we need to fill that gap with communication. How do we get from expectation to experience? We have to communicate. That is the bridge. our expectation that's going to then give them the opportunity to create an experience to fill that gap. So instead of thinking the worst, instead of thinking negative and allowing somebody to fill that gap with an excuse, we fill it with communication. And we sit down at a table and we not necessarily call them out, but we discuss the issue at hand. Now, I would love for in the comments to put what kind of issues do you experience with either a boss or a boss to staff. Down in the comments, I want you to be able to put down the issues and problems that maybe you have at work, and then on a later video, we'll discuss them and we can talk about them. Just to bring us to full speed here again, is there's an issue. As leaders, we think negative. Staff give us an excuse, and now there's a gap, right? We fill that gap with two negatives, our negative and their negative. But if we give them the benefit of the doubt and put a 10 on their head and think the best, they want to do better. I think every staff, every student, every child, every adult wants to do better, but they don't know better yet. So we have to add that YET. We don't know, they don't know how to do it yet. And so it's our job to come beside them and, again, not necessarily call them out. And here's what we do. We don't call people out in a meeting. We call them up in the meeting. I'll say that again. We don't call people out, we call people up, because what we do when we call people out is when we call somebody out, it excludes them. When we call people up, it includes them. When we call people out, it excludes them and abandons them. But when we call people up, it gives them the expectations to say, hey, you're down here. I'm calling you up because at this level, this is how we act. This is how we respond. This is how we do our job. So when we call out, it excludes, but when we call up, it elevates. Our job as leaders is not to necessarily call somebody out, but in the quote unquote call out in our meeting, we call the issue out, the problem out, but we push and we elevate. We don't call out because calling out excludes someone when calling up elevates someone. And I just love that teaching, because if we were just to change our thought process as leaders, to be a better leader, we're to call up and not call out. We call the person out, but we call out the issue and the problem. And we just say, hey, this is the standard now. This is what I need you to do. In order to improve, there is this that we need to do. I think too many times we get into the problem, that the person is the problem, instead of identifying the problem, calling out the problem, but calling up the person. And then we get into PIPs, performance improvement plans, or we get into reprimanding, and there's not even a procedure to elevate the person. It's just we call them out, we write them up, and that's it. But where's the coaching in that? This bothers me when it comes to organizations. I'll ask, when do you do evaluations? And people say, I don't know when the last time I had an evaluation. Or people will say, I get one once a year. When? At the end. So you went through all these issues throughout the year, and then at the end, you get called out about, hey, this is what you did well, but this is what we need you to improve on. Bro, I would have improved in that if you would have just called it out sooner. If you would have elevated me, come next to me, like, you could have had a better staff. You could have changed issues and problems in your organizations. But we wait to the last minute. And what I don't get is, like in school, we have a progress report card, progress report card, final grades. Why are we doing this at work? Here's your progress report. This is what you do well. This is what you don't do well. Where do you find or see needs of improvement? And this is where I see a need for improvement. You always want to get that other person's feedback, but again, the key to this, we don't call out to exclude, we call up to elevate. Because that is our job as leaders. We're leading them up to the next spot. We're elevating up to the next space. If you haven't heard the last podcast about what is your identity, you should start to think, what do I want this staff's identity to be? Right now, their identity is coming in late. Right now, their identity is making excuses. Their identity is only doing minimal work. So how do I call them up? And when we can change this policy or procedure as leaders in our teams to say, hey, when we do evals, we're doing 4. We're doing an eval, like a progress report card, and report card. And I'm going to call out issues, but I'm going to challenge you and call you up because my job is to elevate you. I don't know anyone that's going to be opposed to being elevated. We have to create and make our team's identity as a forward moving, forward progressing, and it starts one person at a time, right? There's a saying that says, if you try to chase 2 rabbits, you're not going to catch anything. But if you chase one, you'll catch one. So don't try to change your team all at once. It's going to take time, but it's one person at a time. I'm doing one-on-ones, and this is how we're going to do it. Here's the added layer to this, a little added bonus, is when we create a culture of calling people up, then we start to create leaders of our own and say, your job is to call up someone who in our department can help you with your position, or we can add a little bit more work. And I want to be careful here because I think a lot of times, and this will be an episode coming up where we talk about how come when I'm really good at my job, I get more work but not more pay. We'll talk about that later. But who can we cross-train to help you with your job so they can learn more? And so we can expand their knowledge, we can expand their experience, but it all goes back to expectations and experiences. We have to fill that gap first with communication, call up, not out, and then we need to communicate those expectations so they can get across that bridge to experiences and then create experiences for your staff. How do we level up? How do you learn more? Little by little by little. And before you know it, within 12, 18 months, your staff know more, they're taking responsibility, and if you continue to call up, you're going to elevate your staff. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember that in order to elevate yourself to the next level, you have to raise that bar and pull yourself up. You too can call yourself up, but you can't do it unless you raise that bar. We'll see you next week with a new episode.